Hello, everybody. Bob Beltz here. Welcome back to the road to somewhere. And we're glad that you're tuning in today. And we have kind of a fun little episode today simply because of where we're stopping on Route 66 and the story behind it. But just to remind you, we have moved into the state of Arizona, which is the next to the last leg on our trip. And here in Arizona, we're going to end up making 13 stops that will correspond to the 13 letters that the Apostle Paul wrote that ended up becoming what we oftentimes refer to as books of the New Testament, actually letters that he wrote to churches, most of which he had actually either started himself as kind of the church planter or that he at least had visited. And today, as we move into episode 2 of this season, we are going to be stopping in the Route 66 town of Winslow, Arizona. And the book of the Bible that we'll be giving just a real brief introduction to is First Corinthians. I might just remind you that in our last episode together, where we entered in and stopped in Holbrook, let me see if I've got Holbrook on our map here. That's right. So we were in Holbrook, and in Holbrook, you might remember that Joy actually began to tell John her background and gave a pretty lengthy description of what her life was like before she made some major changes. Of course, she's been divorced for a number of years now in the story, and she really wants to hear John's story, which what we know is that he has been hiding his actual background from her and from those that have hired him to take this trip and to shoot these videos along the way. And the time has come. If you have the book and you're reading along with us, this is chapter 45. And again, it's a pretty important chapter because John, when they get to their next stop, is actually going to give some of his background and open up and tell Joy the truth. Let's start, though, by talking about where we're ending up today. We're going to be in Winslow, Arizona. And I would say that probably prior to 1972, Winslow was a relatively unknown stop along Route 66. And in that year, Jackson Browne was writing a song, and he lived up in an area of Laurel Canyon where a lot of musicians had moved. And one of his friends was a fellow by the name of Glenn Fry. And as Jackson Browne was writing this song, he got stuck. He couldn't come up with the next verse that he wanted to write in the song, and Glenn Fry happened to stop by his house, and Glenn Fry came up with an idea, and the idea was that the verse would say, "Standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona, such a fine sight to see. There's a girl, my lord, in a flatbed Ford pulling by to take a look at me." Well, that in 1972, that song, which again written by Jackson Browne and Glenn Fry, was recorded. The title of the song was "Take It Easy," and it was the very first song that was recorded by a group that you're probably familiar with called the Eagles. And when that song came out, and ever since then, that corner in Winslow, Arizona, has become a must stop along the road on Route 66 when you're taking this trip. It's actually become a park, technically. Over on the left-hand side of the picture there's a statue, and that statue, a lot of people felt like was modeled after Jackson Browne. And then in 2016, after Glenn Fry died, they put a second statue in, the one that's leaning against the lamppost, and that statue looks a lot like Glenn Fry. And then in the window of the building, you kind of have this reflection of a flatbed Ford that's driving by with a young lady checking out the guy standing on the corner. This particular picture, someone actually pulled into the picture their own flatbed Ford. So Winslow really became sort of, again, a must stop for people on Route 66. And when John and Joy pull into town, they're actually going to check into a hotel there called the La Posada. But they decide that the very first thing they're going to do is get over to the corner and film their video. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but I want to say that it's after they filmed the video and when they're actually having dinner at the La Posada that Joy puts the pressure on John to tell his story. And of course, the big piece of his story, which those of you that know the background of this book, The Road to Somewhere, being a sequel to the book Somewhere Fast, probably know that John is actually formerly a Presbyterian minister, and he knows the Bible quite well. And so he's kind of been putting on a charade, acting like he doesn't know the Bible well, because when he was first asked to be the person to narrate these videos, he actually told the person, Rich Mitchell, that was asking him to take on this job that he didn't know the Bible very well. And all along the way so far, he has kind of made Joy believe that that's the case and that has needed to go and study different books of the Bible. And now he is telling her his story. And of course, the story is in Somewhere Fast. He gives a brief explanation of it here in chapter 45 of The Road to Somewhere. For those of you that aren't familiar with that book, when he was a Presbyterian minister, he had a really big meltdown. By the way, a lot of people thought that that character was modeled after me, or it was a true story about me. That's not the case. He had a meltdown. He actually got in a fight with another Presbyterian minister on a minister's retreat and threw the guy through a pane glass window, which ended up getting him in jail. And he just kind of melted down, ended up getting a divorce and spending about 5 years living a very crazy kind of a life. And the other book, Somewhere Fast, begins with him trying to put his life back together. In that book, and he tells Joy that he has been down Route 66 before, because in that book he takes a motorcycle trip from Chicago, intending to make it all the way to LA. He doesn't quite make it that far in the book, but she suddenly realizes, wait a minute, you've been on this trip before? And have you made all of the stops that we're making? And he says, no, but I've made a few. And he tells her the story about how when he went through Galena, Kansas, there was a very attractive woman actually hitchhiking, which seemed to kind of create a cognitive dissonance in John's mind, because she didn't look like your regular hitchhiker. And he was intrigued, so he pulled over and talked to her. Ended up, her name was Nikki, and she was a graduate student that was actually doing her dissertation on the old nostalgia of Route 66. He offered her a ride on the motorcycle, and she took him up. And so there's a stretch of that book where they are together. And then he tells Joy that eventually, and I'll kind of fast forward here, he ends up marrying Nikki. And early in their marriage, she develops early onset Alzheimer's and dies. And so he's had another real big blow in terms, particularly of his faith. And he goes back. Prior to becoming a minister, he had been working on a PhD in psychology. He goes back, finishes that up, becomes a professor at a small college in Kansas City. And of course, that's who Joy thinks he is. And that's who the people that have hired him to take this role think who he is. As a matter of fact, when he asks the question, well, why me? Uh, he's told that the mystery philanthropist that is funding these videos that go along with those longer teachings of all 66 books of the Bible, like the idea of having someone like a psychology professor rather than a minister so that the videos didn't seem too religious. And so Joy now knows what his background is, and we'll see how that unfolds in upcoming episodes because she's just kind of gobsmacked. She does not know what to do with this information. She asks whether Rich, when he approached John about doing the videos, did he know this story? And as far as John knows, he says no. He didn't, and so we'll kind of see how all that unfolds. There's actually another kind of big twist coming up a little bit further on in the story. Now, let me just real briefly then say that as they're shooting the video, we'll go back to that point in time when they first get into Winslow. John gives a little bit of background, of course, tells the story of the Eagles and the writing of the song Take It Easy and everything. And then he segues into what the biblical book that's attached to this stop is, which is the book of First Corinthians. First Corinthians comes right after Romans. Chronologically, that's not an order. First Corinthians, of course, Corinth was a place that Paul actually traveled. If you go to Acts chapter 18, on his second missionary journey, and after his time in Athens, which is in the 17th chapter of Acts, he comes to Corinth. And Corinth was sort of known as the sin city of the ancient world. It sits on a little isthmus that connects it to the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Say that three times real fast. Anyway, and that little isthmus, boats that were going from east to west or west to east, instead of sailing all the way down and around that peninsula, they would actually drag their boats across, I think it was about 12 miles, that little neck of land, the distance of that neck of land. And while they were getting their boat dragged across there, they would stop in Corinth, which was sat right there on that isthmus. And Corinth became a place that was always filled then with sailors, and it was a wild, wild town. It also was known for the fact that it had a temple to Athena or Aphrodite, and that temple had 1,000 sacred prostitutes that every night would come down into the town of Corinth, where all of these sailors were, and they would sort of ply their trade there. So there was even an expression that said, not every man can afford a trip to Corinth. And yet Paul ends up spending a year and a half in Corinth. It's his second longest stop. And out of his ministry there, a church develops. And I don't know, you might sort of speculate that a church in a place like that might have had a lot of pretty wild characters to begin with. maybe many that were coming out of backgrounds that they had a tough time shaking, because this is a church that's kind of a wreck, to be honest with you. And First Corinthians is a fascinating letter, because basically what's happened is that Paul has heard about all kinds of problems that are going on there in the church in Corinth. And then he receives a letter from them asking a whole bunch of different questions about really the Christian life. And if you can simply remember the two words problems and questions, you kind of know what First Corinthians is all about, because Paul writes them a letter, again called First Corinthians, because he's going to write them a second letter, which will be, of course, Second Corinthians. But in First Corinthians, basically what he does is he spends the first part of the book addressing problems that he's become aware of. There are little cliques that have formed with sort of allegiance to different of followers, some of Paul and some of Apollos, and it just, there's not unity in the church there. There's immorality going on. There's just when they come together for their services, they're just a mess, and people are getting drunk at communion, and others are going home hungry because the people that had food don't share it. And then he addresses a lot of questions, and some great stuff in this book. I mean, the love chapter is there. The chapter on the resurrection, chapter 15, is there. One of the lengthier sections on spiritual gifts, beginning in chapter 14, is there, because they were having problems with spiritual gifts. So it's a really important letter. John just briefly kind of references it in the book, and then really encourages his audience to make sure and watch the teaching video on First Corinthians, which is what I'll do as we wrap up our little episode today. I will encourage you to watch that video, and again, we'll be giving you links to that. Even in the frame at the end of this video, you'll see a place where you can click and immediately go to it, but I'll also give you the link to the teaching video on First Corinthians, and that'll wrap up our time here in Winslow, Arizona, where everybody that drives through goes and stands on the corner, just waiting for a girl to drive by in a flatbed Ford, I guess. So we'll look forward to being with you next time, when we'll be moving further along to Two Arrows, Arizona, and we'll be looking a little bit of the book of Second Corinthians. So thanks for joining us today, and hope you enjoyed our time, and make sure and watch that teaching video on First Corinthians.